Awesome.
So, Zach, if you want to get started, feel free.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here. Welcome to another really exciting Mongers Provisions tasting. The man that you just heard introduce me is Benji. Benji is the monger behind the Mongers. We're also going to have Will Warner at some point make his appearance on this. He'll be in the chats until we get to the chocolate section, which I'll definitely defer to his chocolate expertise. But we have a really fun lineup tonight, and we have all these amazing dads out there. We want to say happy Father's Day early to all of you, and a happy birthday to Gary Walt, whose birthday is on Tuesday, I believe. Happy birthday. Very cool group of people out here, and we're going to have a really fun night walking through all of these foods. I'm going to explain every single beer, every single meat, all the cheeses, but I don't want you to wait on ceremony. As anybody who's been in one of these tastings can tell you, I'm really into this stuff. And I find myself getting carried away talking about them sometimes. So don't wait on me. Try everything. Leave enough that when I actually am talking about it, you can try it during that experience. But you're going to eventually try everything. And I want you to mix and match and try different pairings. And, we'll all talk about what tastes the best. Yeah. I'm really excited to do this tasting. We mostly have done cheese tastings. We've done chocolate tastings. We focused on wine. We have yet to do a charcuterie tasting. It's actually been since I worked at Zingerman's almost 10, 12 years ago that I've done a charcuterie tasting. And I think charcuterie is incredibly interesting. It's really like the alchemy of the meat world. This idea that you take something raw and you hang it, you salt it, you put it in a cave, and like later I can eat it is just crazy to me, and I think it's very interesting. I also, for many of you might know, I live in a house where I'm not allowed any pork products. My wife's a rabbi, and we don't bring any pig at home, so I'm like, this is my night. I'm very excited to eat all these things, and I can't bring any of it home, so I'm going to eat my whole tasting tonight. Yeah. My name is Zach Berg. For any of you who have not joined us for a tasting, I am the head cheesemonger and co-owner. Me, as well as my best friend for many years, Will Warner, co-own this place. And, Mongers Provisions has been around for 3-4 years. We have been always focused on these like experiences, these tastings. We started as a pop-up business. We recently had a guest actually reach out and ask us about a Father's Day tasting from 4 years ago, which is just crazy that we've been doing it for so long and we had records. And it's just exciting. And so we have a spot in Midtown, which is where I'm broadcasting from, as well as the Rust Belt Market at 9 and Woodward, and a new location in that awesome space. And of course, we're online. So that's who I am. We should get started with everything. I mentioned earlier, I'm going to introduce all the beers in case somebody doesn't want to open all 4 beers, or if somebody's at home who didn't get the beer action and wants to figure out what they should open from their fridge tonight. I'm going to run through what we have for the lineup real quick. Cool. Benji, let me know if I'm going too fast or anything.
Nope.
Good. So number 1 is Champagne Velvet. Champagne Velvet is a really cool beer with a lot of history. It actually has, I think, the best story out of the bunch today. There's been a cool resurgence in this, love of craft beer. It's allowed beers that like lagers and Kolsch and Pilsner lighter beers took a while to kind of be in vogue. And I'm so excited that they are right now. So things like golf beer or lawnmower beer are being celebrated for being delicious and made in like a clean, wonderful way. It's not only about these big, heavy-handed beers and these imperial milkshake and this and all these crazy words you hear. And, we at Mongers, we've always focused on beers that are stylistically true. We're a bunch of nerds. We want to be telling a story and educating all these. So we want our beers to fit with that dialogue, and then we still want them to be exciting. There's been, with this resurgence of those styles being celebrated, there's been all these old labels that have been picked up and purchased by new breweries and recreated, right? We have Stroh's that we have locally. Champagne Velvet is a beer that's existed since 1902, according to the can. And it's a pre-prohibition corn-style ale. So they put a little corn in there for sweetness, for softness, kind of like Budweiser uses rice. But they want it to be more forward. Upland Brewery in Indiana purchased it in 2016. They say that it's the $1 million beer because at some point there was a $1 million insurance policy on the recipe. And so it's a beer that's been around for a really long time and is now in the hands of some really cool brewers. And I think you'll find that it's a delicious one. The next one we have is this English Mild. Both of these beers are made from some of our greatest friends in the beer industry. The Topinskis own Urban Rest Brewery over in Ferndale, right across from where we first started and where we met a lot of you for the first time. Urban Rest is amazing. Zach is one of the best brewers, I think, in Michigan, and he's a certified Cicerone. So he's like a beer sommelier, and he is incredibly stylistically true. He is making beer exactly like it's supposed to be, but he still is making it exciting. This is an English mild, so really focused on malt, sweetness, toasty, roasty notes, not about bitterness, not about hops. Then we have this beautiful one. This is a pale ale, and it's a dry hop pale ale. So pale ales are going to be similar to an IPA, but a little bit toned down, I think. And when the term dry hopping means they're actually almost like a tea bag, dropping hops in a bag into the hot beer towards the end of the process. So you get this like really vibrance, but it's not as throughout the flavor. It's kind of clean. It's a little bit more subdued, but it still has this like, I think, big nose, which I really enjoy. It's really fruit forward. And then last we have the Blanc de Noir from Barrel and Beam up in Marquette. And these guys are doing really cool old school like Belgian style. So they mostly do sours or wits or things of this nature. And here we have a classic wit beer. You'll notice I have mine in a glass. If you open this when you want to pour it, they're doing bottle conditioning, which means that they pour the beer and a little sugar in the beer and it all finishes in the bottle. So there's a lot of yeast and things in there. So pouring it off is going to give you a cleaner experience. It's going to foam quite a bit when you do, but you're going to enjoy this beer more in a glass than out of the bottle. These guys are using all Michigan beet sugar for that bottle fermentation. And so 3 Michigan beers in Indiana. Pretty cool lineup. Any questions before we dive into the rest of this beautiful tasting? Need a drink after that.
Nothing yet, I think.
Nothing yet. Good.
Time to dive in.
Cool. Okay. So we have cheese tonight because I get jealous when there's not cheese. I'm defensive of our cheese department. So we're going to talk it real briefly, and I want you to use the cheese kind of as almost like you might crackers, right? You can revisit, try everything with different cheeses. These 2 cheeses are some of the best cheeses for snacking with meats. They're 2 of my favorite snacking cheeses for a really long time. Piave is coming from the Veneto region of Italy. The beers chosen. Real quick, I want to say that. I love that question. So the beers were chosen by committee. Matt Newton is our really wonderful beer buyer, and he's been doing a tremendous job of doing that. And we talk through the flavors, and we kind of decide what we want to do. And when we saw that we could get some Urban Rest beer in cans, which is very difficult to do, we jumped on that, and we're really excited to get those too. So it's a long conversation to kind of come up with these pairings. And throughout the tasting, I'm going to highlight some of the moments where we were really focused on one thing or another. So Piave is coming from northern Italy, from the Veneto region, and it's right by the Piave River. You can think of this as like an Asiago-like cheese. It's really snacky. It's a cheese that I think goes really well with like football and summer sausage. And this cheese is one that I've been selling since I worked at Zingerman's. It was actually one of the first cheeses I walked around with a tray sampling on a football Saturday. And then the next cheese is Grafton Cheddar. So Grafton smoked cheddar has been a part of our business since we opened, really, and then big part of our grilled cheese game. And it's a really beautiful raw milk cheddar coming from Vermont, and they lightly smoke it with maplewood. And I just think that it's, it makes a good antipasta board. It has a slightly different texture, a little softer than the Piave, but both are going to be great and add different hints and different things to your board. So if I was making an antipasta tray, these are 2 cheeses that would often be on there. And an honorable mention to Toma that was almost on the tasting. Toma is another great cheese that many of you guys have had experience with that goes great with a lineup like tonight. Okay, diving into the meats. The meat of the matter, so to speak. Oh, and I mentioned this earlier. I would love to see the chat full of as many dad jokes as possible tonight. The cheese and specialty food industry loves puns, loves bad humor. And so tonight's really, it's your night. Go free reign, go hog on it. So
real quick, Zach, tell people the recommended first beer.
We're going to start with Champagne Velvet. Yeah, Champagne Velvet. It's really soft. It's going to get the night started really well. So go ahead and open Champagne Velvet if you're going to go through all 4 beers. And I think my favorite so far, and I've tasted through a lot of this, Champagne Velvet and Smoked Cheddar is actually really quite nice. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain all the food, but we're going to continue to circle back to this idea of pairings throughout the night. And I'm even going to teach you some of the language we use at Mongers. A lot of you who've been in these tastings a lot could probably recite this part of the tasting for me at this point. But we use a really specific structure when we evaluate tastings, and we find that it helps a lot. So we'll get to that throughout the night. If we're all ready, we're going to start with a little Milano. So you can see this salami has this beautiful mosaic. It's a little bit different structurally than some of the salamis you are familiar with. It has almost more marble texture, less distinct giant fat globules, and that's because of how Cristiano's making this beautiful salami. So Cristiano uses Duroc pigs, and classically salamis are made by using lean meats studded with hard fats. So you take something like shoulder fat or back fat that's a firm thing, and you would put sticks into a log of raw meat and seasoning. Cristiano, in a very cute, endearing, old school way, was like, why would you do this? The pig's belly is marbled already. I don't understand. So he grounds full bellies of Duroc pigs to make his salamis. A group of dads, everybody on this tasting has at some point probably eaten pork belly, and we can all attest it has such a soft chew compared to anything else. And so this salami is made of pork bellies, and I think that softness carries through. Cristiano Cremonelli is a really awesome salami producer. He comes from a family that's been making salami for generations, and he moved to Utah, of all places, because he said it was a perfect triangle between the pigs are raised here, my facility can be here, we get the slaughter from here, the pigs never have to be frozen, they're never that stressed. This is where I want to produce in America. And he's been on this campaign of really making accessible salamis widespread. So you might see Cremonelli in the grocery store. They have different levels of kind of products, and you see Cremonelli in shops like us. One of the very first shops he ever made it into was Zingerman's Deli, and I got to be there when he got launched. And so I got to meet Cristiano a bunch of times. He's a very happy, very nice Italian guy who likes racing and salami in classic Italian style. And his Milano, you might not be familiar with the term Milano for salami. We think of it as a Genoa. And the reason in classic Ellis Island history, we in America like to come to the shortest answer possible. And so you're looking over this import document for some salamis, port of export, Genoa salami. That's what we'll call this. In Italy, Genoa salami means nothing. It's not a salami style. What we eat as Genoa is Milano salami. And so Cristiano, being an Italian, he wanted to tell that story. Benji, I've been seeing questions coming up or things. Are they just great dad jokes, or are there good questions?
So you do have a good dad joke. You have from Patrick, never trust Adams. They make up everything. So you got that one. Zosh wants to know, any chance you know historically when meat started being cured? Will said the jerky revolution of 1741, but I don't know if you have a real answer.
Yeah, I don't believe either of them. I think meat gets cured very early in civilization. It's just a matter of what kind of meat and what, I think that earlier small meats, Will's right, it would have been a jerky. It would have been a backstrap of an animal. The idea of curing a large pig or a ruminant, I think, comes much later in history, but I don't know a specific time, and I think it's a pretty old concept. I know that curing salt cod was a big part of discovering the rest of the world, but that's a whole other book. There's a great book called Salt that I actually just finished that I'm sure speaks to this exactly, but it's a really big book on salt, so I don't remember that day. So I think the Milano, it has a sweetness to it, and I think this with the champagne beer is our very first touching off point for this idea of pairing, right? We often, at Mongers, you can kind of, or not just at Mongers, in the world of pairings, you can kind of talk about it from two angles, right? There's contrasting pairings and complementary pairings. So if I was eating a peppered salami and the sweet softness of this corn cooled off the pepperiness in my mouth, that is a contrasting pairing, right? Pepperiness softened by the beer. if I am doing what I'm doing here, and I think there's a little perfume to this pig, a little sweetness, and I'm making the corn beer highlight that, that's complementary pairings, right? And so I think you'll find this salami goes with everything tonight, but I think that it's just kind of what you want to dial up. So for those who are playing along with all 4 beers, I'd suggest opening the mild, because the mild's going to have a sweetness, but it's going to have a toasted sweetness. And if anybody's playing at home and you have a darker beer, you're going to see what I mean by that, right? If you think of a Budweiser, it's plenty sweet, but it has a golden sweetness versus a darker sweetness from like a porter or a stout. And if you drink that with the salami, I think you'll pick up different notes. I also think it might be darker and kind of hide it a little bit. So go ahead and try along with me if you don't mind. So I think that it was kind of similar to what I thought. I think we're going to need almost a product of more volume to hold up with the English mild because it's so dark. But I also think that notes like the peppercorns and some of the deeper notes of the Milano came out because it was all that was left, because it gets it's a bigger flavor. I think that when we get to the second half of the tasting with the pate and the mortadella, this is going to really start to shine. So, and we'll talk about the levels in which we judge that within a little bit. What questions do we have before we move on from salami?
We got a couple jokes going on. You know,
I love it. Yes.
If you're cold, go in the corner. I heard they're normally 90 degrees. You know, Jay asks who cut the cheese, and then also, what did the daddy buffalo say to his kid when he dropped him off for school? Bison.
What? Yes.
So yeah,
this is the best choice I've ever made.
Do you have your personal favorite cheese joke, Zach? Since you
yes,
the crowd.
Thank you. All right. So, what's the best cheese to lure a bear out of a tree with? Come on, bear. Come on, bear. So, I know you're all laughing at home. We have you muted, but thank you. All right. So, we've talked about salami. I think salami is one of the earlier and most common forms of curing meat. But before you ever think to grind a meat, I imagine you try to cure a whole muscle. And so you'll see on our charcuterie signs, if you ever get a board from us, we talk about styles. And so style 1, salami, style 2, whole muscle. And, it's almost a misnomer because there's definitely a collection of muscles that make up the leg, but it's the idea of that we're using one whole piece of meat and curing it. I'm not grinding anything, right? For this, we're using La Quercia. La Quercia is a wonderful producer that I've been working with for my whole career at this point in charcuterie and specialty goods. They're coming out of Iowa, and Herb and Kathy started this company, Eckhouses. And when they were in Italy at some point on a trip, just the two of them, they fell in love with all the charcuterie and the romance behind it, and they realized there weren't really domestic producers doing a great job. And so they wanted to enter the scene. And as part of the Midwest, we might really think about more than other parts of the country how Iowa is rich in pork. There's a lot of pig farms. There's a lot of culture there. They wanted to find the best producers and showcase their pig in a way that the Italians showcase their pig, right? Elevating the two in art. And I think it's really interesting. We get a lot of people who ask us, why don't we have an Italian prosciutto? And we have at times when we can't find good Eckhouse stuff, or at times just to meet the needs of a guest. But we've found that most of what gets imported out, or most of what gets exported to the United States from other countries is the really big guys. It's the companies that can afford to fly out 4 people from the FDA to certify their facility for export. And so you're not going to get small artisan producers who can afford to ship their prosciutto to the United States. And so it's really large producers. And there's really great stuff, but they're really high-end stuff. So we found that the bottom 2 rungs, let's say, of Italian prosciutto isn't that exciting. So until you get to the highest level of Italian prosciutto you can get in the United States, we think the Eckhouses have them beat. And a big part of that is they have less rules to follow. Italian prosciutto, like so many of these goods, like prosciutto, Parmigiano Reggiano, that's the word. And many other of these cheeses, there's all sorts of rules and regulations on how to make them and where to source them. And so I think we can all picture this giant like bell-shaped prosciutto leg that is prosciutto di Parma or prosciutto di San Daniele. And they're beautiful. They're something really special about something that size, because just like a Reggiano wheel, something ages more gracefully if it's larger. The flip side of that is it takes an incredible amount of salt to cure one of those products. And Herb doesn't have to use this giant bell. He carves out like the perfect little football, makes salami off the rest of it, and he cures that. And we find that he uses less salt very commonly, and it actually accentuates the perfuminess of prosciutto. And so with that perfumed idea, I think back to the champagne velvet, right? You have the sweetness. Prosciutto has a perfume, a sweetness. I also think that what I want to try it with, what I'm going to do in a second, is with the pale ale. If you guys are opening all four, this has this burst of citrus, right? That's kind of what happens when they do that dry hopping. And I think it's actually going to pair really well with the prosciutto. It might overpower a little bit, but this prosciutto is really nice. It's almost going to be like not quite prosciutto and melon, but I'm looking for that prosciutto and fruit kind of idea. Yeah. One of my favorite stories about the Eck houses that I always appreciated is that Herb started like any great entrepreneur. He started in his garage, starting to cure prosciutto and see what he could do to like grow this operation. And he noticed that his hams just weren't acting right. They weren't doing what they wanted him to do. And, you know, prosciutto, how it's made in Italy, is all tied to this very natural season, right? It's all about Christmas, really. It's cold outside. We're going to have a big family dinner. So we need a prosciutto from last Christmas. So you kill a pig every Christmas season and you start a prosciutto leg. And then every Christmas season, you take last year's prosciutto leg out of the cellar and you have your big meal. And the idea of that cycle is that it's going to do some of the really early curing when it's still cold. And then when it's going to get wild and hot outside, there's enough moisture that's already lost that you're not going to rot, right? And it's all about this whole cycle, and it's all about where it comes from. So, right, prosciutto di Parma is known for these winds that come over the mountains and help dry out the prosciutto. And so all prosciutto cellars have windows at the very top of the room that they leave open during the right seasons because they want these prevailing winds to do something. And so Herb was like, I need to recreate this in Iowa. And so he set up his ham stands to have wheels, and he would literally walk his ham rack through his neighborhood every night, through his suburb in Iowa, giving his ham some air because he thought that was going to make the key. I don't know what the long-term solution of this idea was, but I just always loved the story and the picturing him walking through ham, walking his hams around the block. I think that'd be a really fun thing to see. So Herb's an amazing guy. He's still really connected to the quality of his products. I recently talked to him about 4 or 5 weeks ago. We had a long conversation.
Zach, your camera cut out.
Yeah, I saw.
Okay.
Apparently airplane mode and do not disturb does not keep Ed Michelson off my phone. Okay. Am I back now? He imports Italian air. I love that.
You're back.
So Herb is really awesome, really connected to his products. And he, we had a quality issue and he called me directly at home, to talk about this quality issue. And he really puts his money where his mouth is. And he's one of those guys who stands behind his products. And that's why from Zingerman's to Byright to here, we've been selling LaQuercia products and loving them. So it's been our house prosciutto since day one. And we deal specifically with the Tamworth variety. It's the one we've always enjoyed. It has a little nuttiness, might go with the brown right there, or the English mild. And we've just enjoyed it. He also does a Berkshire, a red wattle, I believe, and he plays with some other breeds here and there. Yeah. What questions do you maybe have about the prosciutto?
We did have someone who said the Mortadella and Piave are a good match, so that's a good one. We got another dad joke. What did the fish say when it swam into the wall? Damn.
What? Damn. I'm a sucker for these. The Mortadella Piave, by the way, is a little bit of that grows together, goes together idea. right? Bologna, and like you're talking about being an hour away driving, half hour driving between like where those two things are growing or made.
Yeah, we did get a question on the calorie count on the whole box, or just don't ask, someone said. So probably the better option there.
Yeah, don't.
Um,
Yeah.
then earlier you mentioned kind of melon and prosciutto, and why does that pairing work so well in your mind?
Ooh, yeah. I think it's about, well, to use language we've talked about already in this tasting, it's the contrasting part of the flavors. I think the salt and the melon is a contrast, right? You have the sweet, delicate flavor of melon. It's not a strong fruit. And then you hit it with this like salty perfume of pig, and it goes really well. So I think it's about a contrasting pairing. Word to the wise, that doesn't prep very well a day ahead of time because the salt, it will like pull every ounce of moisture out of your melons, and you'll have like a gross platter in your fridge if you do that too far in advance. That is a fresh product, just so you know. I've made that mistake the hard way. Yeah, any questions about prosciutto?
Doesn't look like it. A couple more dad jokes, so you really got the crowd into it. So
Yes.
yes.
Are these all just Will, by the way? Because that doesn't count.
No, Will has not really participated in dad jokes directly. I feel like he's saving them for when he talks about the chocolate later.
Totally. Okay, so I want to talk about how we evaluate a pairing, because I keep talking about trying different things, but how do we even evaluate this, right? For all of those Mongers regulars, you guys know this spiel. I'll go quickly. -2 to +3 is what we look at when we talk about pairings. The great late Daphne Zeppos is the one who taught me this, and Daphne talked about -2, brushing your teeth, big glass of orange juice in the morning. Everything is terrible. -2. No minty freshness, no tropical sweetness. A -1, I think, happens often when you're like grazing on many things. I think of a cocktail party being the culprit. You're drinking your red wine. You grab one thing off the buffet. You go back to your red wine, and all of a sudden it's harsh and metallic. -1. Something had a bad reaction. A 0 is what happens most of the time when I'm on the couch drinking beer and eating cheese. You're just not paying attention. There's no interaction. There's no pairing. It's 0. Sometimes this happens because products actually won't react in the same way. They won't have much interaction. There won't be this like big hit of acid hitting the fat and this and that. Some products are just not meant to pop in that way. And so those are a lot of zeros in life, I think, with this. That seemed like a bigger philosophy. There's a lot of zeros out there. A +1 is going to be if I'm cooking red sauce and I pour my bottle of wine in the red sauce. My pasta sauce is amazing, and I didn't do many favors to the wine. A +2 is, that the champagne velvet super peppery salami experience I talked about. That's all of a sudden I'm uncomfortable with the pepper. This softens that, but the beer's not that interesting, and the salt and the pepper pull out some of the nuance of the beer, and all of a sudden everything's made better. +2. And then the +3 is the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? The sum is better than the parts. I have found the newest combination of things, and they should always be eaten this way. Beer is much, 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 much more forgiving than wine. And I think the reason why we don't necessarily, when I say we, I guess I mean like cheese professionals don't walk around with like the 4 or 5 classic beer pairings in their head the same way you do with wine, is because beer works with most things. It's a much more forgiving product, while wine is really difficult. So to get those +3s, you have thousands or hundreds of years of history, right? So we have Stilton and port wine as like one of these classic things, or a Sauterne with some foie gras. And it's because they don't go great with a lot of other things. We love the idea of pairing wines, but it's really challenging. And, Will loves to bring up like the chocolate and red wine that everybody in Napa wants to be selling you is not actually the greatest way to enjoy chocolate. And so beer, on the other hand, real friendly when it comes to pairings. And you can do a lot more creative ideas and a lot more fun with beer.
Perfect. We have a couple questions that came in, Zach. Presumably about the prosciutto, but just in general, how long is the aging or curing process of meats?
Yeah, totally. So it depends on the density and the size of the meat, right? back to this idea of the prosciutto di Parma being this whole collection of muscles, and this giant bell. Will's much better with numbers, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think it's probably like 8 to 12 pounds per leg for something that size, compared to Herb's hams, which are like 5 pounds. And what that means is they take less time. So a salami, which is going to be 2 to 5 pounds and as ground, so is much less dense, is going to cure even faster. I think that in general, we're talking about the 10-month to a year range for a lot of these products if they're large format. If you're talking about a little salami chub, right, like something you cut as you go throughout the night, that's probably closer to a handful of weeks. And then the prosciutto di Parma, the like classic, one of the gold standards, that's needs to be aged for a year, I believe, to get its to be a certified di Parma ham leg. Yeah.
Then we had a very important question based on your pairings and the tasting scale. Are you a crunchy or smooth peanut butter guy?
Ooh, crunchy all day long. Yeah, definitely crunchy. Great question.
Yeah, well, apparently that's treason, according to Ariana, so you've disappointed somebody.
Been tried for it before. Okay, so we're going to go on to mortadella. I love our mortadella. I think our mortadella is incredible. And we've been on this, like, I'd call it a mortadella journey. Will and I really enjoy mortadella. We tried one vendor. We tried the next vendor. This one has nuts. Do people want the nuts? Is it going to be an allergy issue? We kept trying to changing through our different, there's a handful of meat producers we really like to work with. I guess Tremonti, Smoking Goose, Creminelli. We're not necessarily calling new folks all the time for new meats. We kind of work with the people we've been working with for a decade. And we tried everybody's mortadella, and some were better for this, some were better for that, some were graying too quick. And Tempesta is the one that made us the happiest. The downside of Tempesta's mortadella is, I got to back up to see if I can get my arms all the way. Yep, there we go. So, nope, other way. This big. Maybe about that big. But it was a 16-pound mortadella. That is an obnoxiously large piece of, emulsified meat to be selling. And so we gave that one a break after we sold that monster of a mortadella. But eventually Tony agreed to make us little half ones. And so we're super excited to be working with what we found to be the one we enjoyed the most, but wasn't logistically possible at first. Tempesta meets formerly Andouille Artisans. This is a really great outfit out of Chicago area. They have a great deli worth visiting, and they make all these wonderful products. It's Tony and his father, which his name's escaping me at this moment, but his father's from Calabria, where a lot of really good Italian meats come from, and Calabrian chilies. And in like this beautiful immigrant story, I feel like they are making the food of Tony's father's youth, but in this like new fun way. And they're the cutest father and son couple. So it's very appropriate to have them in this tasting, because they always are like bickering and half Italian and half English at food shows, but you can see with like a glimmer of love, and like they really enjoy working together. They make really great foods, and we carry a handful of them that we're obsessed with. Shout out to their Wagyu pastrami, which is on a really high running for one of the best products of 2020 for us. Tony saw us at the food show, and Will and I, at least I have a reputation of being one of the Jewish guys in this industry. And so Tony, like from far away, was like, oh, you're going to love this. Come here, I got to give you this new pastrami, and like chased me down with a piece of pastrami. It's a totally welcome thing in my life if anybody wants to chase me down with cured meats. And we've been selling it ever since. And so they're making, the food, some more creative new things that have nothing to do with Calabria, like pastrami, but they started their business. In fact, it was named Andouille Artisan. So Andouille is really their flagship product. Andouille is a salami from Calabria, flavored intensely with Calabrian chilies. And they are the only people I know who make like a full format, back to these giant bolognas he makes. He makes like an 8-pound Andouille, which is just insanity in my mind. But they're really beautiful flavors. And the mortadella is no different. It's so silky. So we talked about salami, we talked about whole meat. whole muscle, we're going to talk about not the prettiest concept, but emulsified meat, right? Bologna is an emulsified meat. There is no distinction between protein and fat. I just have one beautiful silky texture, and that's emulsification, right? Just like a mayo. This meat has that like perfect unctuous silkiness. It also has a lot more seasoning than some of the other things we've had. The first two things were really, it's all about the pork. They don't want to really season it in the same way. When we get to the mortadella, you start tasting the hand of the chef a little bit more. And I think that's why it's going to hold up to things like in the middle of our tasting. And I think this beer, somebody mentioned earlier, how do we arrive at these beers, right? So Champagne Velvet, as soon as we said we were doing a charcuterie tasting for Father's Day, made it to the menu. These two I told you we got because Zach Dupinski's pretty brand new into celebrating his first Father's Day, brand new dad, and we just love him and we got a chance to get his beer. This one was really strategic. Matthew wanted to bring it in. He loves this brewery, and I wanted something that was spicy. And I don't mean spicy in like a chili pepper way, but I think the exact words I used was, I want some fruity esters to play with. And so Belgian beers, the yeast and all of that the yeast is what's making this beer so special. And it's known for these coriander seasoning to go into it and sometimes citrus peels. And so if you think about these next two tastes, as you go through them, the mortadella and the pate, the terrine, you're going to really get why I wanted that beer in there. It's going to pull out those spice notes. So while these things we're talking about the sweetness of the pig, this is going to talk more to the flavoring that's in the meats. What questions do we have before we go on to the terrine?
People are really loving the mortadella, and as well as people have snuck ahead and ate some of the rabbit and pork. So good,
you should have. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take a mortadella break real quick. Benji, do we have any great jokes that need to be said?
Yeah, we got a good amount of jokes here. What did the Buddha order at the hot dog stand? One with everything. Why did the farmer bury his car in the field? He wanted a bumper crop. You got, let's see, what do you call a dinosaur made of cheese?
What?
Gargonzilla. So
that's
some cheese
that's
jokes.
Rough.
Yes.
That's rough. I appreciate it being on point though. Okay, friends. So we have done so far, Italy, Vermont, Utah, Iowa. I ate it already, but this was Indiana. So Indianapolis, Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana. Little fun there. And then, I did that wrong. We were in Chicago with that one. Now we're in Indiana. So the Indianas. Smoking Goose is in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's a really cool organization. They kind of similar to a Zingerman's or a Byright. They're a little hodgepodge of different companies. So they have a cafe. They have the charcuterie / smokehouses, I believe what they call that business. They now teach classes in their USDA processing facility. They do a lot of things. And I feel like as they navigate the waters of creating everything from, sausages that are grillable to pâtés, they not one shoe fits all, right, for them. And what I mean by that is with their sourcing, right? They're incredibly transparent that some products use organic pigs. Some products use pasture-raised pigs. Some products are using heritage breed pigs. And I don't believe that any product is using a commodity pig. I think that they have some base standard, which is wonderful, but not everything is using their highest echelon of stuff, right? What they're putting in their hot dogs isn't necessarily what they're putting in their pâtés. This is the highest echelon of stuff they make. These are all pasture-raised pigs in their Smoking Goose pâté, or in the terrine. The rabbits are not pasture-raised. I had a really wonderful tour of, I believe I'm going to forget the name of the farm in San Francisco, but everybody wanted to know about the pasture-raised bunnies. And the farmer looked at everybody as like, are you joking? Like, you can't pasture-raise rabbits and have them. They're gone. So it's a rabbit and pork cheek pâté. So these rabbits do live in confinement. The pork is pasture-raised, and it's this wonderful pâté of chunks of rabbit meat, and the kind of glue is going to be pork liver. And then the outside, this beautiful latticing that they do on the outside, is jowl bacon. And I think this is one of the most beautiful expressions of charcuterie. Charcuterie is this overarching word we use to talk about olive cured meats, kind of like the Italian word salumi. And when I went to culinary school, this is the stuff that interests me the most. I really liked old school preparations, ballotines and galantines and terrines. And it's this idea that you use absolutely everything, right? After I've cut the pork chops and seared those as a center of the plate, and I've done the bacon with the bellies, and I've done this with that, what do I have left over? I have like the head, and I have some livers and things. What can I make that's delicious? And throughout history, we've always had different cultures that needed to stretch the very end of something. And I feel like this comes out of such a long, beautiful tradition of that history. And I think it's incredible that every culture has their version of this, right? The Jews have gefilte fish. You have pate, terrine, you have head cheese. I think that it's just, it's fun to see how people arrive at that product and what product they call out when they try it or see it for the first time. But this is really, I think, one of the prettiest and most surprising products we've carried in our time. And it was really popular in the butcher shop and less popular when we moved to Detroit. But you can see just beautiful chunks. I think that for some people, moose is more challenging, right? Back to this emulsified meat. I think sometimes when your meat is just like a spreadable, fluffy thing, that's a little bit different, a little bit hard to get grasp. This is like eating meatloaf. If you're like, ooh, that looks a little weird, it really is, it might look weird, but I think it chews in a really familiar way. I invite you to try it if you haven't yet. And this with this is going to be what it's all about. The coriander, the lemon peel, this has an intense baking spice note like mace. And I think it's all going to go really well together.
Zach, is there any dairy in the terrine? Someone asked.
You know, I don't know off the top of my head. They often use milk powders and different things to bolster the fat content of a terrine. If I bet Will's already Googling it right now, but Will hopefully can mention in the chat what he finds. We were really lucky. We usually carry it in a little pre-pack. I mentioned that it didn't sell as well here as it did in Detroit, but because we had this wonderful tasting, we were able to buy the whole really beautiful, like 6-pound pate loaf or terrine loaf with the lattice on top. So I don't have the ingredient label anymore. Yeah. So I mentioned culinary school. What I wanted to make was pate en croûte, if anybody is familiar with that. So the same idea, but instead of being bacon on the outside, you'd actually have a crust. And all these things cook at different temperatures and different times. And same with this object, right? You have these chunks of clearly rabbit meat, you have the liver, and then you have the jowl bacon. They all have different reactions to heat, and they all need different things, but somehow they're able to cook everything perfect at once. And I think it's just, to me, it's really some of the most masterful cooking. I think all of us can kind of cook off a steak and do a lot of the stuff that we hold in very high regard in restaurants, but it's the really old school preparations that for me as a lifelong student of food and who cooked for many years, this is what like just blows my mind. So shout out to the turkey galantine. If any, it's been on back order. I swear I'm trying to get it from Fermani. It's a similar idea. Like we all like, well, not all of us, but many of us enjoy turkey. But turkey is usually you just take the breasts, take 2 or 3 of them, smash it together, make it a circle. There you go. And these guys are like, no, let's use an old school technique at Fermani. It's a place run by Paul Bertoli, one of the former chefs of Chez Panisse. And he's like, you have this whole animal. Why don't we tumble that? Take the dark meat, the white meat, all of it tumble, make it into a circle. And now I have the most flavorful sliced turkey meat you ever have had. It should be in at the end of the month. I swear I keep getting shorted. But yeah, we really love these old school techniques. I think it's been really fun to watch the resurgence of those as people have just kind of been more aware with food lately. What questions do we have?
Looks like Will said there's no dairy in the ingredients that he was able to find. So
thank you, Will.
Good there. Pat says the terrine and the wheat beer is the winner. That mixture together is beautiful. Some other great dad jokes. Did you hear about the explosion in the cheese factory? All that was left was debris.
Yeah, I like that one.
So, yeah.
I love it. So I've talked about this idea of like pulling out different notes, but one of the other things I like to talk about is volume of flavor, right? The IPA, or not IPA, I'm sorry, the Imperial Pale Ale, still an IPA, is definitely the biggest flavor. And so for me, it's the one that goes the best with the pate as far as trying to find something it goes with, because the pate, while it is really mild and I think more suited for the wit, it can still hold up, right? A lot of the other things kind of get washed away by that. And if you are still have some cheese left, the IPA and the smoked beer will probably be, the smoked cheese and the IPA will probably be really nice together as well. I'm going to find out right now. Benji, what other questions do we have?
No questions right now. Just
No questions.
lot
Okay.
of really good dad jokes out there.
I'm glad they're flowing. I knew it was going to be a good audience for that. So at Mongers Provisions, you know, we've always done the cheese. We started in a chocolate shop. And so Will was the chocolate guy. I was the cheese guy. All puns intended. Will and I always thought that we kind of met in the middle when it came to meeting in the middle. You know, I've been lucky to like be in the specialty world for a long time. So I know a lot of the great producers, but I don't consider myself like an expert on charcuterie the way I consider myself an expert on cheese. And so we get to do this kind of journey together, and it's been fun for us to meet more producers and get to try all their different products. And we've continued, you know, similar how I mentioned the beer, we're always trying to educate as well as feed. We keep doing on that meat journey with you guys as we've increased our charcuterie footprint. And so we've really picked up a lot of cool products in the last little bit for all you meatheads. You know, if you love the prosciutto and then you haven't tried the Acorn Edition prosciutto by him, you're absolutely missing out. The Acorn prosciutto is mimicking the Iberico flavors, this idea that if you feed a pig acorns or peanuts, it's going to change the flavor of the meat in the long run. He also ages it further out. So our Acorn Edition Tamworth is a true culinary treat. From Brooklyn Cured, we have a bresaola that is covered in black pepper and mushroom powder. Really flavorful. Bresaola is a cured eye of round, and it's beef. So it's nice to have some beef options. And the Newski's duck breast is insane. Speaking of Newski's, you all should have a pound of bacon. I hope you didn't lay it out for this tasting. We want you to cook that up at another date. But Newski's is a wonderful producer out of Wisconsin, and they make absolutely fantastic stuff. I sold some Singerman's. Their duck breast has become a new favorite of ours, but you have their Applewood bacon, their standard. There is not a food show that I go to that I don't visit the Newski stand just to get another taste of their bacon. And I hope you guys all enjoy it. There's just the right amount of sweetness, just the right amount of saltiness and smoke to it. And make sure to save your bacon fat. It's like the greatest thing to do is to have a nice jar of bacon fat you can cook from it later. So spoken like a good Jewish cook right there. Don't let your bacon fat drip away.
Cool. We do have a couple questions that came in. First, a commentary from Will. Don't listen to you about the Newski's. Real dads eat it raw. So he obviously.
Yeah. Fair.
And a couple questions for you. So David wants to know, as a formerly kosher person and pork novice, what makes a great mortadella?
Ooh. I think it's all about texture. You know, that was the thing that we tasted a handful. Yeah, Will. We tasted a handful of them, and they all were seasoned well. And the ones that really stood out were the ones that left you with that silky feeling. I think the other ones had a little bit too much chew. It almost makes me think of like al dente noodles, right? I want to have a toothsomeness to my noodle. I don't want it on my mortadella. I just want it to be soft. And these had just a little too much springiness, the ones that weren't the nicer ones.
What are the premier cheese regions in the USA, Pat wants to know?
Ooh, premier regions in the USA. Wisconsin is America's Dairyland. You can know because it says it on their license plate. They are no longer the largest producer by volume. California took that over a couple years ago, but they absolutely are the richest in like heritage. And I'm not even saying that as like a joke. Nobody has more pride in their dairy heritage than the Wisconsin people. So Wisconsin, Vermont, California, those are the top three ranking by volume and prestige. California has done a lot in the last, I don't know, 20 years or so like that. No, like 40 years in the cheese industry, really growing. There's a hotly contested debate that resurges every once in a while at the American Cheese Society. At their like, what is it? It's not a round table, but what, like the they have like an open forum lunch every year, and people really want there to be name protection in American cheese, where this is Wisconsin made and this is Vermont made, and there's actually like legal repercussions to misusing these terms. And every time that goes on, eventually someone will be like, let's protect the name cheese because of all the vegan cheeses out there. So yeah, that was a little rant, but it's a funny story, I think. So Vermont, Wisconsin, California. Michigan's getting up there. We're doing a really good job thanks to people like Idle Farms, Zingerman's Creamery, Evergreen Lanes, White Lotus Farms. Yeah.
What about Pinconning?
Pinconning? Yeah, sure. It's a nice cheese. There's definitely some heritage there. There's a history. Yeah, why not?
Is there name protection to cured meats in Italy and Europe as well?
Yeah, you cannot make prosciutto di Parma and bra or something like that. You have to use pigs from a certain region, aged in a certain region. There's stipulations on the feed. And this was one of my favorite moments in Italy. I was at a wine bar in Tuscany, and we're eating this plate of, nothing's marked, nothing's named, and we're eating this plate of deliciousness. And I'm like, oh, this prosciutto di Parma. And they're like, no, idiot, it's prosciutto di Tuscany. We're in Tuscany. Like, why would we be eating Parma ham here? And I loved that, like this idea of like, yeah, you eat you eat the village ham. So there are name protections. That doesn't mean that every single village ham gets that name protection. So prosciutto di San Daniele, prosciutto di Parma for sure have name designation. I don't think prosciutto di Tuscany has the Toscano has a name protection. But there's definitely a handful of salamis that do, or cured meats that do, and salami as well. Like a salami felino, whether it's name protected in the same way like champagne is, it means something. If it's a felino salami, it's a Roman style salami, incredibly coarse, stuffed into a bung casing. Yes, I did say bung casing. So if you like felino, good for you. I like felino, but I think when people hear that, sometimes they like felino a little less. But yeah, there's certainly old rules and like standards to those recipes.
Is there a specific reason as to why these rules, or is it just kind of the old school mentality?
Yeah, it's the old school mentality, and it's to protect the ability to continue to do things in those old school ways. I think that we're far enough in history to see how industrialization can get its claws into anything. And I think that these name protections are really the last like bastion of protection before these products just become industrialized, right? There's nobody who, not nobody, many of the people who own these businesses, they're still businessmen, or businesswomen, they still have families to feed. And sometimes profit and things like that are just too tempting is the idea. And so by keeping these rules, we make sure these products are still made in these special ways. And these products are like, they're part of their heritage, right? If you look at something like, I know I'm going to France here, but Roquefort, Charlemagne made decrees about Roquefort being cut in half. You can't buy a whole wheel of Roquefort anywhere in the world because Charlemagne decided that in the 1400s. So like, I think it's important that we still do these things. And I think that something would really be lost if we just decided these rules don't make any sense for us anymore.
Perfect. Random question that maybe Randy will get answered. In an amazing meat in Croatia that was not allowed to be exported. Do you have any familiarity with Croatian meats?
I don't. And it's meat is way harder to export than cheeses and wines and other things. I can't speak to that really well. I don't know why it's harder, but when I was in my food show in Italy, everything I tasted and saw, I was like, oh, this is cool, but I can't get it to America. It felt like it was like the ultimate teasing trip. But yeah, it's really hard to get things into the States that are cured meats.
Then we have a question about the rind on the Piave Vecchio. Is that more of a personal
Yeah.
choice to eat the rind? I know you have the kind of details on that right there.
Yeah. So the rind has a very thin paraffin paint. So there is some waxiness to that rind, but outside of that thin paraffin paint, and it is food safe, you can't put a wax that isn't edible wax on a cheese. So it's like those wax lip or those wax bottles from when you were a little kid. You can eat the rind. I don't find there's a lot of taste in that rind because of the paraffin wax. It's made in a really clean facility, so it's not that romantic cave idea. And so for me, it really just kind of tastes like dried cheese over there. But if you prefer that textural difference, I encourage you to try rinds. I always tell people, I just cut the piece and did it the wrong way, but let me show you how I tell you to eat a cheese. If you have not met this cheese before and you are meeting it for the first time, cut like so. I have rind on one side and not on the other. I'm going to eat towards the rind. And if I like everything going on, I'm going to go ahead and eat that rind. And for cheeses that don't have something that's like artificial, like a wax on it, that is a great measure all the time. Generally speaking, softer rinds or cheeses that are surface ripened are always going to be edible, and firmer cheeses are less likely. Avoid things like Parmesan, because although it is not wax or artificial, it will break your teeth, as it is 2 years of dried cheese and it's a really thick layer. Yeah, still don't like that rind. I tried it. What questions do we have? What else?
I think that's it for the questions right now. I think we're in a good
Cool.
spot.
Good. I'm going to change modes to chocolate. Will, do you want to talk chocolate or do you want me to keep going? You can text. I feel like I always talk about chocolate. It almost feels weird talking chocolate when you're on this. You want to do it?
It's all
Just
you.
keep going.
Keep on going.
Okay. So chocolate. I think Will's done. I'm going to give him all the credit for this. He's done a great job curating a chocolate selection. And similar to the beer, similar to the cheese, we do everything with some level of intention. And so we focus on craft chocolate. We focus on chocolate makers, not chocolatiers. I was making this point recently on a national tasting. Everybody was in a different state. And I was like, similar to this chocolate person or that. And I was like, oh, we have no frame of reference. Like if I say Saunders, no one knows what I mean on this tasting. And it became almost crippling. But so if we talk about chocolate in Michigan, right? Bon Bon Bon, just around the corner from where I am right now. We love Alex. She makes amazing stuff. She's a chocolatier. If we talk about Saunders, Gale's Chocolate, a Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory or whatever those places are called, Kilwins, these are all chocolatiers, right? They're taking chocolate and they're repurposing it. It's an art unto itself. We have all the respect in the world for it. It's just not what we focus on here at Mongers. We love this story of connecting you to geography and cultures. And so we focus on chocolate makers. These are folks that are buying beans from various parts of the world and making it into a chocolate, right? I think it's important to recognize the amount of like manufacturing work that goes into making a chocolate. I always like Will describes on a purely scale level, it would be as if you were taking bricks, masonry bricks, and breaking them down into grains of sand. That is the amount of processing we have to do from a cocoa pod down to a chocolate bar. There's a lot of steps in between. You're breaking it down to that particle size and then getting it with the fat and all these other things to make it into a bar. Chocolate bars are all
just from the bean to the actual, not even the pod. So you're talking about something the size of, 3/4 of an inch long and taking that and breaking it down into a sand-sized particle,
It's an incredible amount of work to do. And to Will's point, that's just the grinding of the bean, right? To get to that point, we've already had to climb up to a tree because there's absolutely no mechanical way to harvest chocolate in the world. Somebody cut out a pod. They then on the floor split that pod open, pulled out all this pulp and bean. I think it's really important to recognize that most of us we can't visualize this the way we can visualize cheese making, especially because it happens in the tropics. It happens between 20 degrees north and south of the equator. So they've taken these beans out. They've fermented with the pulp that we never get to see because we're not in chocolate growing regions. They've dried it, roasted it, and then what Will was talking about, they've manufactured it from a brick to a grain of sand. Then we season it, flavor it, whatever, and make it into a bar. The chocolate bar is a relatively new invention. It comes out, I believe, 1840, 1860, very close time to when processed American cheese comes out. For most of history, we enjoyed chocolate as a drink. So chocolate has this amazing, rich history. And in so many ways with industrialization, it kind of just got erased, right? We all grew up liking Belgian chocolate and Swiss chocolate and German chocolate. These are 3 countries that don't have a cacao pod for miles, right? We literally erased where chocolate comes from. And Will and I are so happy to talk about geography and cultures and travel because it's been how we discovered food. And even more so in this like current moment of Black Lives Matters, to celebrate the people who are making our food is really important. And so to skip over all these people who live in the tropics who make chocolate is a real travesty. And I think that it's compounded by the fact that, you know, 3/4 of the world's cacao production is coming out of West Africa in countries where there's labor issues and child labor issues. Ghana is responsible for something like 15 or 20% of the chocolate production in that country alone. And that has some really issues in their labor practices. And so we look to partners in this industry that are going to be doing direct sourcing, or they're actually at that country of origin, even better yet. So just because there are problems in these countries, it doesn't mean you can't find really good cacao grown really ethically in every country that's producing cacao. And we're really lucky to have those partners and have those connections. So Maru is actually in the country of Vietnam. You all should have a Maru bar. Maru is a really cool company. I have a Maru example. Let's get this on screen. Boom. Maru. Maru is coming out of Vietnam, and I think they did this tremendous job where you have a history of imperialism in that area. The French bring cacao to Vietnam, and post-imperialism, you're just selling it to the commodity market, right? We have this product, sell it on the agricultural commodities. And it took two visionary men to come by and be like, why don't we celebrate Vietnamese cacao for what it is? It's different, right? If I grow something in Ecuador, it tastes different than if I grow it in Vietnam. It tastes different if I grow it in Madagascar than Ghana. And so they started to celebrate the terroir, the taste of what is Vietnamese cacao. And they do it in this beautiful way where you all probably have different color bars at home, but each color correlates with a different province, and they source just from that region. So similar to this discussion we've always had about wine, where I'm tasting left bank versus right bank Bordeaux, now I can taste what's one side of the Mekong Delta versus the other side of the Mekong Delta, and how does that affect the flavor of the cacao. And so Vietnam is not the only place where you can travel with us. Will's done this tremendous job of building a collection of over 30 cacao growing regions. And if you look at countries like Venezuela, Peru, Nicaragua, and Vietnam, you can go village by village and taste Chasca versus Maripon versus the Ucayali Valley, which are all three places in Peru, probably really horribly pronounced. But I'm a visual person. I can find the bar, and that's important. And so it's a really fun journey through chocolate. And I've been, as you can hear, really energized by it. You know, I've been in specialty goods for 12 years, and Will was able to curate a selection and understand chocolate in 2-3 years in the way that it's taken me a decade to understand cheese. And I think that, you know, he's built the largest selection of bean to bar chocolate in the state of Michigan. And so you can come and really educate yourself on all the amazing flavors chocolate has to offer by tasting through this world with us. And I just think it's a really special tool we have in the store. And I invite you to try more of our chocolates.
So Zach, my neighbor Pat asked if there's a socially conscious certification in the chocolate market. And, you know, there is fair trade. Like you can go to a lot of stores and see fair trade chocolate. But that means that the farmers were paid more than if they sold their bars to, let's say, Nestle, right? But in terms of what that actually means, they might get $200 extra a ton. So if they're selling a ton for $2,000 on the commodity market, they'll get $2,200. A lot of the farmers that are growing the cacao that gets turned into the chocolate that we sell, these relationships often are not fair trade certified, but they're more of a direct trade relationship, or they work with specific brokers that deal in this kind of cacao, and they're often getting paid $4,000, $5,000 a ton for the chocolate. So quite frequently, they're getting nearly double the rate of commodity prices, and substantially more than they would if they were just getting fair trade. So.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, I think fair trade is better than nothing for sure. But I think it's also important to remember it's an organization. So it has administrative costs. There are people that take from that pile because they need to continue that certification. And so that's why whenever we can, we love this idea of direct trade. Even better yet, you're at the country of origin and you're lifting that country up in a way. There's a really special bar, a company called Ascania Chocolate out of Haiti. And that's a really cool example of where, you know, she sees chocolate as an answer to the equation of how to help Haiti. She is not a chocolate nerd. She is a graduate of the Wharton School of Business and somewhere else that Will can remind me in the comments. And she, you know, is looking at her country and seeing the agricultural
I believe
opportunities.
the school is called the University of Michigan. You might have heard of it.
I blocked it out of my memory. I'm sorry. She went to U of M and Wharton. I have heard of that before, as well as Vincent, actually. Two great chocolate names to come out of U of M. So she sees it as an answer to the equation, right? You have all sorts of problems in Haiti. You have a terrible average yearly wage, and most of the economic stimulus goes to the Port-au-Prince, the capital. And so all of a sudden, if you're paying farmers a livable wage 2-3 times, like Will was saying, the normal commodity price, they become middle class in that country. And so by paying farmers and selling directly to consumer and skipping out of this commodity market, she's empowering the farmers of her community to make chocolate and grow themselves out of poverty that way. And I think it's a remarkable concept. And when you juxtapose that with Nestle's, Hershey's, Mars, these companies have been around for 50s, hundreds, you know, many, many years, and they created this commodity market. And, you know, there was a really great article that came out last summer from the Washington Post, if anybody wants to look more into this idea of chocolate and transparency. And the US government, the US Congress asked all those companies, they said, hey, we'll give you 20 years. Do us a favor, verify all of your sourcing. It's something we'd like to be able to say, Hershey's isn't using any child labor. Take 20 years to figure it out. That 20 years elapsed last summer, and all those companies did this. You can't feed the world chocolate and know where that chocolate comes from. Unfortunately, when you have multi-billion-dollar multinational companies, it's really hard to say 100% comes from this or 50% comes from that, and we can verify this. And so, you know, for us, we would really love to see a day where people hand their kids a treat that isn't maybe made by a kid your kid's age in another place that doesn't look like your kid. And so we really want to find these people who are showing their culture off through their chocolate. And Maru does that. You know, they're making all Vietnamese cane sugar in their ingredients. And when they do inclusion bars, like the one I keep putting my hand on, you know, they don't have milk in Vietnam, cow's milk, that they can find a consistent powdered form of, but they do have coconut milk. And so they made a coconut milk bar. And they use kumquats because kumquats are in Tien Gang, where they make that bar from. And I think it's such a cooler idea than just, we put chocolate covered almonds in this. Like they're telling you a story about where they're from. And I think that this idea where chocolate can be a really positive intersection of culture is, it's a lot tastier than just a chocolate bar. So that's my little soapbox moment. And you should try this with the English mild, by the way. The chocolate and the mild is going to be really nice with that toasty malt note.
Another question from Pat. He asked if there's a clear regional advantage for cacao like vanilla quality-wise. And generally, I would say no, in my opinion. It's more dependent on what you're looking for in the quality of the chocolate. You know, if you like a bright and fruity acidic chocolate, then Madagascar and Belize are probably going to be better for you, you know, than Ghana or Venezuela. But if you like a more chocolatey chocolate, you know, then the Ghanaian chocolate or chocolate from Cote d'Ivoire is probably going to be preferable. But the reality is there's so much variability in the cultivars from region to region. And, you know, we're talking about plants that originated in the wild and then have been hybridized and crossed for hundreds of years, and especially intensively in the last, you know, 200 years or so. And then the other factor is that there's so much flavor development that happens during the fermentation and drying process. And so you have a lot of control in that respect. And so that even more than like the terroir or the species or subspecies of cacao tree, you know, you can take a tree with, you know, mediocre genetics, for lack of a better word, and turn it into really good chocolate if you ferment it well. And you dry it well and you have good, you know, good processing techniques. And you can take the best cacao in the world, and if you just suck at fermenting chocolate and don't care about, you know, how your pH level's changing and whether you've completed your fermentation or done it for too long, it's going to taste bad.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point. And I think that in general, you know, as much as morality is obviously important when we talk about sourcing, you know, we're still also a food shop. And I think it's important to recognize that it all tastes better too. Like it's of course done with more consciousness, but I think it's more enjoyable. And we have deeper conversations about the flavors and yeah, it's just a better context makes it taste better.
Perfect. We got another question. Will, I don't know if you want to answer the, has anyone attempted to greenhouse cacao, similar to what companies in BC have done with wasabi?
So not that I'm aware of on any commercial scale. For those, you know, we're here in Detroit. If you were to go to the Belle Isle, you know, the conservatory on Belle Isle, or you go to Meyer Gardens, you can go see a cacao tree, you know, flowering, fruiting with pods on it at Meyer Gardens or the conservatory on Belle Isle. But I don't know that it would be commercially feasible to do. I mean, if you think that our chocolate bars are expensive, I can only imagine what it would cost to have greenhouse grown cacao that's you know, harvested by someone with a degree from Stanford.
Sounds delicious though. I also think, you know, it also bears mentioning, you know, drying the cacao is a really significant process depending on where you are geographically because of rainfall. And so, you know, growing it isn't the only hurdle you may have to this production. And so we've talked a lot before about like Bali as an example of a country where because of rainfall, all cacao is mechanically dried, meaning by like a heat source or a fire. And so Balinese chocolate always has like a smokiness to it. And some chocolate fans would say that's a flaw, but I think Will and I would call that terroir. And so like, we think really focused on the growing, but to the point earlier, it's like step one in like a very large process to make chocolate. If anybody really finds the idea of like, wow, I've been eating chocolate my whole life and I have no clue how it's made fascinating, I would direct you to not Maru, but Mindo chocolate. Nope. Manoa chocolate. There we go. Manoa chocolate has a really wonderful YouTube series called Crap Chocolate TV, where they take you through about 12 different episodes showing you every element of the chocolate making process. They're in Hawaii, so they're the only American-made cacao that we actually sell. So they're growing chocolate on the in the islands of Hawaii. Benji, you got to visit them, so you might be able to remind me of which island specifically.
So they actually recently bought a plantation area in Oahu, and so and they also have I forget what the other island is, but they do have a couple different areas, and then within another 5 years or so, they should actually increase their production of Hawaiian-specific chocolates.
That's awesome. And so, like, this is the only company that we have that is producing cacao grown in the United States. You know, to that geographical border, I really like because it's such a small distance to remind people you can grow it in Cuba, but Southern Florida has no chocolate production. And so, yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into making this bar that we, you know, neglected to the dollar store shelf. And I think it's fascinating to look at the ingredients in our bars, and to think about how dark chocolate, what the percentages are. And just to give everybody a little bit of knowledge on the percentages, it's the overall percentage of how much of this product came from Thrombium cacao, came from the chocolate tree. And so it's both the cacao solids and the cocoa butter for a good chocolate. The Hershey bars, they're called compound chocolates because I've added a different fat into the equation. And you're getting much less cacao on a lot of these conventional chocolates. So when we have a milk bar in the shop, they're sometimes in the high 40s. Sometimes we have milks that are in the 60s compared to a Hershey bar, which is sub 15%. Even their dark chocolate is usually like 46%, if I remember correctly. So it's really, I like to joke that I'm a fat kid turned pro. And when I talk about our chocolate, like I can eat a Snickers without remembering I opened the wrapper. But for these, you know, you really, the little corner is so much more satiating because it's giving you what you came for, which was the chocolate to begin with.
Perfect. We have a couple questions that have trickled in. First, Gary wants to know how we can get your leftovers, Zach.
I've been diligently going after them. So they won't be here before I leave, but yeah, they're not up for grabs.
Perfect. And then for you and Will from Pat, sounds like you guys have had many trips to visit suppliers. You ever revisit any, or once you establish that relationship, are you kind of all set?
You know, I haven't necessarily visited farms more than once, mostly because I just don't have the opportunities, but those relationships are definitely cultivated over years and revisited. At least in the cheese and charcuterie side, there's these really great things like the Fancy Food Show or American Cheese Society Conference or Good Food Awards and the Good Food Mercantile Show. And these are all opportunities for the producers that we carry to like meet up and taste us on new things and say hi. And so, you know, I mentioned Herb Eckhouse, who I called or talked to 6 weeks ago, and I've known him for 12 years. And every time I see him at the show, I say hi and tell him we did this tasting back at Zingerman's years ago. And one day he maybe will remember me on site, but you know, it's a relationship that we cultivate for a really long time. You know, this is a perfect segue. We're doing a tasting next week with Rachel Jewell of Essex Cheese, and Essex Cheese is a company that I've sold their cheeses, their whole profile for a decade plus. And Jules and I have been friends that whole time. So, you know, her and I have had drinks in Ann Arbor, San Francisco, and Bra, Italy at this point in our lives. So I don't necessarily get to go see her at her home office or go to the caves over and over, but those relationships are definitely things that we hold dear and are constantly cultivating.
Perfect. What scale do you have to get to before the suppliers start reaching out to you directly? I know, you know, obviously Mongers started up and now you're in a good spot.
I'm really proud to say we're at that to some degree. You know, I'm certainly not saying that like if a Cristiano Cremonelli was coming to town tomorrow, he would not look at us like he looks at Zingerman's and be like, oh, I need to get into Mongers. That's going to be my entry into the world. But we are really lucky that people seek us out at this point. I think Will and I can both say that like one of the coolest frustrations we have is when you feel behind in your sampling. You're like, oh my God, I have all these sample bars that I haven't tasted and the vendors are asking me my opinion. And you're like, how am I possibly stressed about having 20 chocolate bars I need to taste? I have 2 bottles of wine in the fridge. I just had the vendor ask me what I thought about them. I haven't tried them yet. And like, what an amazing problem to have that we're backing up on things to try. But we're lucky.
It's really dependent. I would say it's more dependent on how good their sales rep is or how involved the owner is on whether they reach out to you or not. We get tiny companies reaching out to us that are, you know, for some of these operations, we've been the first company to carry them in the state of Michigan. And then we'll get huge companies, or in our world, what we consider huge, reaching out to us and asking us, hey, do you want to try this new product? You know, we developed something new, and it is a lot of fun. You know, Zach and I, we always say we don't do this, you know, to get rich. And so one of the great benefits is when a box of charcuterie samples shows up in the mail. And it's especially advantageous for me since my wife is not a rabbi and I can take all that home. Zach just try like small scraps of it at the store. and then I snatch it away from him and actually get to enjoy it at a relaxed pace over time.
It's totally true. Speaking of which, I have peanuts in the car that I needed to give you because they're maple bacon flavored peanuts. They're really good. You should try them.
I've got some of
yeah.
that. I've got some of that wild fish canned salmon to give you too. I got some samples of, so
Yes.
you can take them home.
I love this. See, we work it out.
Coming soon to a Mongers near you is the best canned salmon you guys have ever had. So
we've been expanding our canned fish selection. I don't know if any of you guys have clicked through or eaten through these amazing canned fish, but Will and I have been on a little bit of a journey with that. It really, there was a major catalyst at the last food show when we kind of went hog wild tasting every canned fish we came across. But now I'm looking at some like 10, 12 different SKUs instead of the 2 or 3 we used to carry. It's a really cool world, and similar to like cheese and wine and all the other things, it's this like amazing cultural exploration and all these different cultures preserved in a little can, and a great way to tour the world. So I definitely encourage you to check that section out. We don't have any kippered herring. Seems like we should, probably based on our own cultural heritage. We'll work on it. It's not as popular as you might think in America. When I was in Italy, I got to try canned river eel. It was absolutely insane. And it was so expensive. And the idea of trying to sell like $40 cans of river eel in the United States just made me shudder. We're not as much of a canned fish culture as I hope we will be one day.
Yeah, we have, I did just, that's my dad actually asking that question. I did just order some smoked herring from the same company that makes the amazing canned salmon. I haven't tried it yet, and it unfortunately was out of stock because this company's small, and their COVID has been very good for the canned fish business for them. So they're having trouble keeping up with demand. But hopefully we'll get it soon.
The canned eel was delicious. I was in a specific area known for their river eels, their freshwater river eels, and I enjoyed it grilled a little bit more than canned and cured. But the river eel was incredibly fatty and delicious, and not something I could have sold in America. What other questions do we have? Anything else, friends?
Looks like it's slowing down, but I will throw one over you. You mentioned the event coming up next week. You mentioned some of the canned items. What else does Mongers have coming up in the world?
Yeah, so Essex tasting coming up, canned fish, summer wine. We're gonna have some blogs out coming up about that. You know, this time of year, it's funny because you probably might not be thinking about Christmas and the holiday season, but Will and I are about a week or 2 away from really needing to start sorting that stuff out. So it's hard because we're kind of existing in 2 different time frames. This time of year, I like to focus on things that are really good for the weather when it's really hot outside, and our kind of eating habits go from inside around the fire around the table to outdoors on the patio around the pool. You know, we switch from mozzarella or from Gruyere to mozzarella. We start talking about halloumi more, and cheeses like sheep and goat milk because they come out in spring. So we have a great cheese called Marissa, which is a young sheep's milk cheese that I think would make the best cheeseburgers that we just brought in. We have an old favorite Shepsog that just came back, which is a sheep cow cheddar blend. In the
Such
world
a weird cheese.
It's so good. And then Will's brought in a couple new chocolates. You know, we brought in a bar from Ghana. We talked about that a bunch today, and it's such a great representation of like chocolatey chocolate, right? Not every chocolate needs to be a crazy tangent, and so much of us have grown up with this West African profile in most of our bars, and so it's a really cool example coming out of Wisconsin. And then Good Now Chocolate, there's 3 or 4 new titles. So, you know, there's not a section of this store that doesn't have a new product in it. Even in the time of COVID, Will and I have been kind of scrambling and finding new things to hopefully keep you guys interested. We're starting to carry coffee and all sorts of different things. So stay tuned and keep letting us know what you guys want, right? Like, so much of this comes out of the interaction we have with you guys. You know, we did this whole shark cheddar tasting, and I think that Dave Feltz and so many of the friends of ours who are from the farm field tables can attest to, like, there was months where everybody was like, I want a sharp cheddar. And I'd give them Cabot cloth bound and they'd be like, you're not listening to me. I want a sharp cheddar. And that's where Hook's 8-year came out of, was hearing that enough and finally realizing that, like, I wasn't hitting it. And so keep telling us what you guys are looking for, because it makes us better. We like to respond to it, and hopefully it makes it more fun. So yeah, thank you guys for all the, support we've had lately and all the great ideas, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys.
Just out of curiosity, how many of you would be interested in a conservas tasting? So different canned fish, think sardines and belly tuna, stuff like that. Just throwing it out there. We haven't planned one, but I'm curious if there's any interest.
I was just letting everybody know I wanted to host that one. That sounds delicious. Yeah, please let us know. We really do enjoy getting that kind of data. Reach out to us on all of our different social media platforms. We are now on YouTube with all these great tastings, and Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook. I'm on Twitter and TikTok, but that's not the business. Either way, we try to stay out there. We try to give you as many opportunities as we can to follow us. I saw Benji shaking his head. That was awesome. And we're going to keep putting up blogs and things like that. But and we're going to soon premiere some boxes, some grilling boxes and some Detroit pizza boxes. So there's a lot on the horizon.
Zach?
Yes, Wendy.
Okay, this is just a this is just a card. It has a picture. Okay,
so the
it has a picture of a drink. It has a hot dog, and it has fries, and it says, "Enjoy a tasty treat." And inside, it's Father's Day. Hope you relish every moment.
That is an absolute perfect segue. I feel like that is the great way to say Happy Father's Day to everybody, where Wendy took our dad joke to the next level with having a prepared card of a dad joke. That was just too amazing. Thank you guys all so much for being here. As always, we're going to keep the chat line open a little bit as we all pack up, but this is the end of your regular programming. We're so thankful for this opportunity to continue to taste with all of you guys. And, it's been such weird times for all of us around the world. And I know I can speak for myself and the rest of the crew that we're so thankful for this opportunity to still feel normal and do what we love to do. And so, like I said earlier, if you guys continue to be here, we promise we'll continue to do what we do. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
What's the any bets on how fast Zach can finish everything left on his board? All the beer and all the cheese. He has to Uber home, but
Oh,
no? All right. Seconds. Oh,
I'll start right now.
Finished him.
Yeah, there you go. No, it was another phone call. I need to figure out how to truly block the world from calling me during these tastings.
Just block Ben's number.